If you've ever struggled with those little halos or outlines around some of your masks that you get inside of Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, I've got a couple ways that we can help with that. So the question that I get most often is when somebody does a sky selection or a sky mask of some sort, and they start to see that little outline between the sky and the foreground. Got a couple of things here for you. One of them's going to be really simple. The other one's going to be a little bit more of a technique on when I do get those halos and little outlines, how I can try to make them better. So this first one is from one of my viewers, Michael Bidding, who sent this photo in. And it's a landscape photo. You can, of course, extrapolate this to any genre that you wanted to. But essentially, you know, we go in here, we edit the photo. If I were to show you the before photo, it was pretty well captured. You know, it's well exposed. It's got a bright sky, so the foreground's obviously going to look a little bit darker. So we do a little bit of editing to it to get it around where we want. But from here, once I get it there, I definitely want to bring the sky down a little bit, okay? Take that sky down. So we can go over to our masking tool, and I think the default thing a lot of us do is we go to select sky, and we get a sky selection. And then the problem is, and a lot of times it'll show just a color overlay. Sometimes I change this to a black and white. We'll leave it as color for now. I'll show you why I change it, and we'll bring the exposure down. So here's what a lot of people will do. The first mistake is they try to do this, okay? They'll try to do something along the lines of this, and this happens a lot in a sky replacement too. In fact, the way that I started to refine this technique was to look at what Adobe does for its sky replacements, but it starts to look like there's this halo between the foreground and the sky, okay? So the question that I'll get all the time is, how do I get rid of this halo? And the problem is the way to get rid of the halo is really not do an edit to the photo that causes the halo. Because the halo is coming out because there's a big exposure difference between the foreground and the sky. And you're never gonna make this sky look good in this photo. It doesn't belong there. And because there's that exposure difference and because of that light that we have on those hills, you're never gonna make that look right. So the first thing would be bring it back to earth. If you wanted to make the sky a little bit darker, bring it back down to earth to a level that looks semi-believable, okay? Or actually preferably 100% believable, but bring it back down to a place that looks good. Now, when you get to that place, if you were to zoom in, you'll still sometimes see a little bit of a halo inside of there, okay? So I'm not saying we can't make that sky darker, and I'm not saying we won't be successful in doing it, but we gotta bring it back and bring it back to a point where maybe it's not quite as visible. Now, once we get there, we're gonna go over to that mask that was created, and we're gonna click on Add. We're gonna go down here to Brush, and I'm gonna hit the right bracket key to make the brush really, really large. If you look at your brush settings over here, I'm gonna put that feather all the way up to 100%, flow and density all the way up to 100%. Again, I want a large brush here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the outer ring. You see how there's two rings? The inner and outer ring, that's the feather. I'm gonna start painting so that barely just a little bit of that inner ring starts to touch, not the sky, but the foreground in there. And I'm gonna start painting. Now I'm gonna undo for a second. I'm gonna go back to my mask or to my overlay. I'm gonna turn that overlay on. I'm gonna change it to white on black just because I find it a little bit easier to use. So that's what we started with, right? I'm gonna click Add, we'll choose Brush again. We've got our brush here. And I'm gonna go through and just get that inner ring to barely touch the foreground. And you can start to see the black goes away and the white comes in, which means that we're kind of eating away into that mask a little bit. All right. Let's go back and change this. We can even turn the overlay off here. But we'll go through here again. I'm just going to paint a little bit, just get that inner ring just barely to touch. And what's happening is, if you could see that brush, it's a very feathered brush, meaning it's got a really soft edge to it. And that's why we're able to get away with this. And I'm only using part of it. And that's also why I made it a really big brush. If I made it a small brush and I did this, you'd start to see a really dark area start to go onto the mountain there. Okay, so we don't want that. That's why you need to use that large brush, because it really spreads out. It really feathers that change that we're making inside of here. As a quick side note, if you see some of the photos that I used here, they're actually part of my Simple to Stunning course. This is a course, it's basically a workflow course where I take my viewers' photos. So rather than just working on my own photography, I think it's so much more useful to work on the problems that everybody else has. So I take a lot of my viewers' photos, and it's a total start to finish workflow course. And I think we've lost a little bit of workflow over time. And it's more important because in Lightroom today, we can do so much more than honestly we could 2 or 3 years ago. And in Photoshop, we can do so much more than we could 2 or 3 years ago. So putting those together and knowing what we can do and what the things we can do and work on, I think can be really helpful. I'll tell you, me personally, there's things that 3 years ago I wouldn't have even attempted to do on my photos because it would take too long, that today I can actually get done very fast. So if you're interested in a workflow course where I take a bunch of photos from start to finish, swing by and check out that Simple to Stunning course. It's on sale now, and something I think that you'll really enjoy. All right, let's get back to the tutorial. So it's going to be different for every photo, but you get the idea of what we're trying to do here to make that mask blend in a little bit more. If you want to see what gave me the idea for this years ago. So here's a sky replacement image. You can see there's the layers that made the sky replacement. When I zoom into it, I want to show you that mountain here, and I want to show you the masks that created this. So this was just, if we Option or Alt click on the mask, we can see just the mask. This is just the sky replacement where Adobe made the auto selection, and they do blend it a little bit with that auto selection, but that's not really where the magic of why Adobe's mask or sky replacement works so well. The reason why it works so well is they add another mask down here, and you can see when you look at that mask, see how that's spread out there? That's that mask fading. That's light being added in there. You can see the layer, and then that's that mask being feathered and faded, and that's why it blends better than just doing a hard selection like the original sky would have. So it's a little bit along if you were to try to visualize it a little bit more and think about a sky replacement, that's a little bit more along the lines of what's happening in the background there. Of course, when I look at this, to me, the sky's still a little bit too dark, so I would probably back off on it. Maybe even pull back a little bit on the highlights there. And then one other thing that I see where people start to go down a bad path, and the only way around this one is just don't do it, and that is clarity. Clarity is going to make your halos look even worse. So let's go in here and let's take away. Let me just delete this little brush one that we have here. And let's bring our exposure back down just so you can see how bad clarity will start to make this look. But if you start to add clarity to this, it makes your halos a lot worse. Okay, then you'll really start to see them. So I know a lot of people tend to add a lot of clarity to their skies. I'm not really one of them because it makes them look a little too fake for me. But if you do that, just remember that's going to exacerbate the whole part of this when it comes to those halos, and it's almost going to make them impossible to go away there. So let's look at one more example here. And what I'm going to do, let's close that. What I'm going to do is I just want to zoom into an area for you. So I want to zoom in. You see the difference between this and this? All right, let's open up our masks. Click on there, and I'll turn off the brush. That's what we started with. So I'm actually showing you the after first. And I showed you the after first because I think it looks fine. That's the before. That's where we start to get into trouble. So I'll just undo here, and I'll show you exactly what I did. Let's delete all masks. Let's go to my sky selection. Go over here to tone, make that sky a little bit darker, bring some of those highlights down a bit too. Make that sky a little bit darker, but you can see, I don't even have to zoom into it that much. You can see all along here, it just looks weird. It just looks fake. So the same thing applies. We're gonna use the same tool for it. We're gonna click add, we're gonna choose the brush tool, get a very, very large feather setting, a very, very large brush, and then we're gonna go through here and just kind of chip away at there. Is it going to make the trees darker? Absolutely. Is anybody going to notice it? Never. Okay. Somebody notices it, you've done something far worse to your photo if they're looking at that, or you've done what I'm doing here, too much like that. So nobody's going to notice that. and you just chip away into it, and you just use that inner ring. Remember, that space between the inner ring and the outer ring is feathered, so it's gonna help you gradually create a transition between that foreground and that sky. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you're in the market for another tutorial, you're in a good place, because I've got one on one of my favorite tips for removing distractions inside of Photoshop. So if you're looking for another video to watch, that's a great place to go to next.